Would you like to talk about why ultimately Mark had to leave BBC? What kind of differences he had with the management, the director
Yeah.
general
Well,
at that time?
so there was a sort of a new leadership of the BBC in London, and there was a new director general in the mid '90s called John Burt, and he had different ideas of running the organisation, and he wanted to be on more managerial lines, um, and there was a sort of complete reorganisation, top to bottom. And as I remember, I think I'm right in saying another journalist was brought in from London who took the title of head of bureau in Delhi, which had been Mark's job, and Mark became South Asia correspondent. And the argument
Mm,
was that would free up Mark to do more reporting, and somebody else would do the bureau management side of things. But I
mm,
think Mark was disappointed by that, and I think he was also unhappy about some of the changes happening in the BBC. And at a conference in England, which he went back to speak at, he said he described the new director general of the BBC as a Dalek, which was a sort of a Dalek was a figure from Doctor Who. They were sort of rather monstrous tyrants of figures, and he said that John Burt was running the BBC based on fear.
fair. That
Um,
was his headline of his speech he gave at Birmingham
that,
Radio Academy Festival.
that's right, and I don't think he expected it to make so much attention, but it made front page news because Mark Tully was a very famous correspondent in Britain, of course, as well as in India, and
And
this was
BBC also reported his speech very extensively at that time.
well, it did because I mean the BBC reports the BBC as well and tries to do that fairly. So I think Mark thought that you could actually, as a BBC reporter, you could be very wounding about the head of the BBC and life
Mm.
would continue as normal, but it didn't. And I think there was a lot of pressure on Mark to leave the BBC. And in the end, he resigned. He wasn't sacked, he resigned. He chose to leave. Um, but it was a bit of a wrench. He was only 59 years old. He had still, lots of journalism to do. He went on to continue broadcasting as a freelance. He had a weekly program on Radio 4 in the UK about about faith, actually, and he did other things. He made some TV series and TV programs, but he was no longer the main BBC correspondent in Delhi. And I think it took him a lot of time to get used to that. But of course, once he'd left the BBC, he stayed in Delhi. He stayed in Delhi for the rest of his life. He didn't retire to back to England. Delhi was his home.
Mm. So I think the current generation would not have chance to listen Mark's report, but I think they have got this news, so now they know he was such a great man, such a great journalist. What do you think young journalists, journalists of this generation, can learn from him?
First of all, be humble. However famous you become, you remember that journalism is not about you, it's about the people whose lives you are reporting on. I think that's one very big thing. Um, and secondly, go to the story. Go to as close to where the story is happening as you can. Don't be tempted to do it from a distance. Your journalism will always be better if you go to where the story is happening rather than rely on secondhand digital forms of information. And third is be kind. Have a kind demeanor because your personal warmth will come across in your reporting. And I think that was Mark's style of broadcasting was very much his own. He was idiosyncratic. Um, it wasn't what you would call the textbook way of doing things, but his warmth and his personality, as well as the quality of his reporting, came through. And that's why he had such a big impact on his audience. I mean, I can't think of another BBC correspondent who was revered in the way that Mark was. Lots of good correspondents, some great correspondents, but none that quite had the authority and the impact and the reach and the name recognition that Mark Tully deservedly achieved.
Thank you very much, Andrew Whitehead, for giving your time and talking about Mark Tully.